the Thursday, October, oh, sorry, I think may have started before we started streaming. Good morning, everyone. This is Eric Davidson, Chair of the RTD Board speaking. I will now call the Thursday, October 17th Executive Committee meeting to order. We are convened as of 11:30 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. I would respectfully ask everyone attending this meeting to mute yourself unless you're recognized to speak. Please note that the committee meetings of the RTD Board of Directors are being held remotely via Zoom and are audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meetings, will be posted as soon as practicable on the board's website. During today's meeting, we are providing communication access real-time translation, also referred to as CART. Anyone who would like to access this CART service should send an email to the RTD Board Office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com, and a link will be provided. Additionally, the CART transcript can be automatically translated into Spanish for anyone who would like to access a live transcript of this meeting in Spanish. A live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. I will now call for the roll of committee members. First, Vice Chair Catlin.
Here.
Second, Vice Chair Geisinger.
Here.
Secretary Guzman.
I'm here.
Treasurer Bouquet.
Present.
And this is Chair Davidson speaking. I am also present. We do have 5 our committee members present. I see, for the sake of the record, we are also joined by Directors Tisdale and Rusha. Thank you for joining. The Director Rusha, you've raised your hand. Do you have a question, please?
Yes, sir, just for the good of the order. I was wondering if we would have CART available for executive session. If so, I missed the email. Is that something staff could look into?
Yes, Mr. Kroll.
Sure. Yeah, the plan is to have CART for executive session as always. So that information will be communicated.
Okay, thank you. And if
Director.
it was already, would you mind just sending it forward? I wasn't able to find it. I appreciate it, and I apologize for interrupting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Mr. Kroll. I'll now move to public comment, and we'll open up to anyone from the public who would like to address the committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current and immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not already done so, please either raise your virtual hand on Zoom or press *9 if you're dialed in by phone. During this time, the committee will not offer any direct comments or responses. However, if you would like to be contacted regarding your public comment, please email the RTD Board Office using the email address rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. Mr. Kroll, at this time, I am seeing one hand raised, so I'm just going to go ahead and note, and we'll ask for your assistance in calling on folks. Before calling on folks, I'll just remind everyone that staff will unmute you when it is your time to speak. If you are dialed in, you can press *6 to toggle your mute settings. Please bear in mind that by participating in this process, you are being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, you can submit your comments in writing, and those can be submitted to the RTD Board Office at the email address rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. I'll ask speakers to please begin their remarks by stating their names, and then each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak. With that, I see the first speaker in our queue on Zoom is Mr. Bob Diniger. Please go ahead. You are now recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. So good morning. I am a candidate for the RTD Board District A, and therefore take keen interest in all matters before the board, as I have for a number of years, but particularly with regard to the requested agenda item, director orientation, onboarding, and continuing education policy. And as 8-year member of the board of the Colorado chapter of the United States Distance Learning Association, the last 2 of which I spent as president, I'm somewhat familiar with the topic at hand, and aware that always when making decisions about these types of things, the first fork in the road one comes to is the training to be synchronous or asynchronous? In other words, real-time interactive or content that you can access online at your own time and potentially be tested and graded on. And I would like to suggest that we keep in mind that folks' working schedules are busy to begin with. And obviously, with this document being only about 20 pages out of a board packet of 800 plus, I'm glad I caught it. I think that it would be wise to consider the amount of time being asked of the new board members and also to look forward to future trainings so as to capture the content in an asynchronous manner. I'm not saying don't do synchronous as well, but to just maximize the efficiencies and perhaps do that within the context of an LMS, a learning management system. And keep in mind that folks going forward, like to his credit, Director Guzman, who works full-time in the retail business, time is precious and he sacrifices his, and the new incoming board members will need to do that to a fair extent, but this is limited, as I see it, to Monday through Friday. I don't know if it's 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Time frame. So I'm going to strongly advocate that you consider asynchronous as a part of the mix to capture the content and be able to use it going forward, because software is the gift that keeps on giving. I'll stop there. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, sir, for the comments and for joining us here. I'm not seeing any other Zoom participants. Mr. Kroll, can you confirm that's the case, and do we see any phone participants?
Chair Davidson, this is Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office. I do not see any further attendees present who have indicated a desire to provide public comment. And in anticipation of your subsequent question, we did not receive any email comments in advance of this meeting that were intended as public comment.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Kroll, thanks for the anticipation there and for stating that for the record. All right. With no other participants in the queue and all comments being noted, we will close the public comment period at this time. We're going to move into recommended actions. Before we do, we have recommended actions 1 today and discussion items. I just want to note that we have a lot to cover and need to use the limited time well. I am going to aim for us to get through the items on our agenda, except for the executive session, by 12:30 if possible. At that time, we'll be entering executive session. And I'll just ask to table if there are remaining discussion items around that time. So obviously, there's a little bit of flexibility there, but I just would like to use the time efficiently, and I wanted to let everyone know of that target before we get going. All right, with that being said, there is one recommended action this afternoon. As a reminder for the committee, staff, and anyone watching or participating in this meeting, all action items that are passed by the executive committee, even if they are unanimous, will be included on the board agenda under recommended actions so that the full board will have an opportunity to discuss the measure presented. The action under consideration for the committee this morning is for director orientation, onboarding, and continuing education policy. This is for the board of directors to adopt the attached director orientation, onboarding, and continuing education policy. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I hear the movement as Catlin, the second as Bouquet. I'm going to open up the floor just to see if there's any additional comments from Board Office Executive Manager Jack Kroll, Secretary Guzman, if they'd like to comment at all further on this policy. Once again, I'd like to thank you for the work and thank you very sincerely for bringing this to the committee last month as a discussion item when we had a robust opportunity to get a look at this and then provide any subsequent feedback but prior to this coming to a recommended action. So with that, Mr. Kroll, Secretary Guzman, I'm happy to yield to whoever would like to speak. Please go ahead and present anything you would like to.
Jack, do you want to?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Director Guzman. So we received a some very good input from both Director Sloan and Director Rusha that are reflected in the revised policy before you for your consideration. So I thank them for their input. Some of it related to adding some additional items during the orientation process, notably really a recap from the board office of major policies and resolutions that the board has passed. And also emphasizing, that there needs to be significant support from staff throughout all of the training and onboarding of new directors. A couple other things to note: we have begun some initial conversations internally with the board office around the timing of all of these things. We really want to have a calendar to present to the board and to new directors as soon as we possibly can. There is a significant amount, as if you have reviewed this policy, of trainings and other items to be covered, likely well in excess of 40 total hours, if not more. There was some concern, I will note, around the specific timing in section 7. This is packet page 16 bleeding into page 17. My recommendation on this front is to leave it as is. There is a significant amount of training to cover throughout the course of onboarding a new director, or in this case, what will likely be 7 new directors. And having the ability to clearly set expectations in the policies as to when these will occur, I think is important for our ability to get not only staff scheduled, but also directors scheduled. What I will say, and it doesn't go so far as to being an entirely asynchronous system here, all training sessions, though, however, according to the policy, will be recorded and kept with the board office for subsequent review. And it's not lost on me that there is, additional improvements that could be made to make training materials more asynchronous and interactive, but that's a huge lift at this juncture, and it's definitely not off the table for now. But in the meantime, or it's definitely not off the table in the future. In the meantime, however, know that the board office will keep record of all of these things and make them available at any director's request at any time, so they can review the materials. And with that, I have nothing further to add.
May I?
Please.
Thank you. So a couple of things to keep in mind with this. One, it is 3 distinct parts. There is onboarding, there is orientation, and there is training. The training has 2 distinct parts: subject training by topic and matter, and then continual training for directors, which could be both within the agency for all of us to get together and have a study session, for example, or outside external training at APTA conference, or the Latinos in Transit conference, or the WTS conference. So I want to remind everybody, we're trying very carefully to be specific about those 3 distinct parts working together to create a policy that will prove fruitful for everybody. One thing, Jack, that we may want to list under the last section where we put the previous policies is our policy regarding staff time and usage. And because this is so heavily reliant on staff, I think that that's really the impetus for securing the regular business hours of staff who will be doing these trainings, as part of that consideration for doing that within that time frame of their regular business day and not extending it past that. It's not always going to be perfect, and there is plenty of wiggle room. It's at the discretion of the chair to change those times in coordination with the general manager, CEO, and the subject matter expert that will be doing that training. But we do need to have a plan going forward and be able to calendar things that works for all parties, not just the directors and not just the staff. And so I think that's when the rubber meets the road, forgive the pun, but really to be able to plan things out accordingly, so we are not asking too much of staff time or too much of the director's time and giving things up. It makes sense to do this during the regular run of business. And I think that was the background behind that. So I just wanted to address that because we have a policy we're bound by and how we are to cooperate with the agency personnel on matters like this. Thank you for your feedback. I did not hear anything else from anybody, so I'm excited to get more feedback from you if you have it.
Thank you very much, Secretary. I'll go to some questions. I'd like to know for the sake of the record that Director Sloan has joined us as well in the meeting. I'll start and go to Second Vice Chair Geisinger, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Guzman and Jack Kroll for all the work on this. I think it looks really good. And my only comments are sort of outside of it. One of them is that I think last year there was some really good information at the ones that I was able to attend that would be good for ongoing directors. So as you're preparing for these, and the staff puts in a lot of time preparing for these, as you're preparing for these, if you can give current directors a little synopsis of how that might help them and encourage them to attend, I think that that could be really helpful. And then the other thing that I think is helpful, and I was happy to see that you have some external focused sessions, but at various times in the past, we've met with the state demographer, we met with the state budget committee, we've had our lobbyists come in. I think we've done that once recently, but I think keeping the board up to speed on all of those things happening in our world around us by adding some of those either into the training sessions or into study sessions is a really important piece of that at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Geisinger. Other questions? Oh, Mr. Cross, you raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just real quickly to respond to Director Geisinger's feedback related to keeping the board up to speed on current topics and initiatives and the broader context of RTD and the environment in which we operate. If this is approved, the board office does have some clear direction in the policy to survey directors and SMEs on staff to see what are the big issues and topics that the board should be educated about from a continuing education's perspective for the subsequent year. And hopefully we can capture some of those through that. Obviously, the context that we operate in changes every day, and we won't maybe necessarily to have real-time feedback on that, but we can look around the corner a little bit, see what's coming, and plan accordingly.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Director Arusha, a question?
Thank you, sir. Just a comment. And I'm looking at packet page 11 because it has the edits in it. That's where I found it. But under just disregarding the hours of 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. So just taking into account, excuse me, what folks have already said, including the fact that current directors might attend some of these trainings. Like last year, some of the trainings we had were new or significantly updated from the year or 2 years prior. I think we often say we'll try something, and if it doesn't work, we can go back and amend it and change it later. But it is a really heavy lift for us to go back and do that. And I would just offer that we strike that sentence entirely, and recognizing we're all adults, let the board office staff, the chair, and new directors sort out times, because I do think it's a bit inequitable, whether it's the incoming new directors or the ones after, to suggest that in order to be effective at your job or to even be a director or run for this position, that you might need to take 10, 12, or 15 hours of PTO. And just further, I know it does say, unless explicitly requested by the chair, that's putting the onus on a person who might not have the privilege of daytime flexibility, to make a case to the chair. And I just feel we're old enough and adult enough to sort that out, and to put something so prescriptive in this document, while good, well intended, and it might work out, I think it could cause some consternation in the future. So just in the spirit of actually being considerate of others, and also looking at our board operating guidelines and recognizing that we have a diverse body and we always will, I would suggest that we just strike that sentence and trust that folks can work it out. I would also add that there are other parts of this document that make very clear we have an expectation of all directors and new directors in their onboarding that they are present, that they show up and they take initiative. And I just, again, don't want to give the wrong impression, you know, for those who don't have the flexibility of others, in daytime. And I have not spoken to Secretary, excuse me, um, Treasurer Bouquet on this, so I'm not calling him out. But I'm just thinking back when I was a teacher, it would have been so hard for me to be a board member. So he's a superhero for managing all this and being a coach too. But I wouldn't have been able to onboard 8 to 5 properly last year and the year before if I still had a teaching schedule. And so I just want to, that's just like one example, but most folks don't have this flexibility. So to keep it, equitable for new directors and current directors, and I didn't always have this flexibility when I was onboarding, I would just ask that we strike that sentence and work it out amongst ourselves. I think we're all professional, and I think the board office can handle it as well as the incoming chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Director Sloan, please. Oh, Director Sloan, you're on mute.
Now I'm visible and audible. I think Director Rusha has made a good point that both sides need to be flexible on this. And there was something in there about being in person present. And I think there needs to be flexibility to be online as well as the timing of these programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the comments. And again, this will come before the full board as a recommended action. So I do encourage, if there are, no matter what the results here, if there are recommended changes to, those can come forward as amendments. Secretary Guzman, is there anything you want to comment on with respect to that topic, given your extensive work on this? If not, that's fine.
I am grateful for the feedback. I think it is something we can consider, but there is a fail-safe, which is that the incoming chair will have the privilege to work with the CEO to make a change to the scheduling if and when it's necessary. And if we are adults, then the board can work together on that with the incoming directors, and we can adjust as necessary. I think for facility's sake, this is not overly prescriptive, but this does set some guidelines about when we want to try and get work done. And if that doesn't work for everybody, then we have to have that conversation. But we did make a commitment to have this completed and turned over to the state and through the OSA process. And so the commitment from staff is they also have jobs to do, and we're relying on their expertise, and we need to rely on them, but we cannot overburden staff who will be presenting on these matters. And so I'm trying to take a big step back, and not make this just about from the director's view, but also be considerate and kind and respectful of the staff who will be working with us to our benefit, for the service of the agency and to our constituents. And so I think that's one thing that I would like to keep in mind, but we can certainly discuss this offline, and continue on with the meeting. Jack, you had your hand raised. Was there something you needed to add?
Mr. Kroll, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I just very quickly state that, there were significant delays last year in the scheduling of certain trainings due to board member availability and staff availability. And so we're really trying to get out in front of this and set clear expectations in advance so that we're not sort of, 10 months in and still trying to pin everybody down for when they can make a meeting. That's part of the reasoning for including something like this and setting the expectations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kroll. Thank you, Secretary. Director Rusha, your hand is still raised. Is that just from before?
Sir, I had a clarifying question.
Oh, please go ahead.
Thank you. I just, and I had discussed this with Mr. Kroll, and I just wanted to, maybe he could address this. I think it might be captured in this new version, but I didn't want to make an inference without guidance. I had noted that we don't have a book of resolutions or actions that is accessible, easily accessible, and often just our board website can be clunky, or there's a broken link or the like. And so I was wondering if that is, because we tell people to be familiar, with new policies or most relevant things and resolutions. Is that something that is on a calendar to be addressed so that our current and new directors have access to that? I felt like it was alluded in this document, but I wasn't sure. And if I'm off topic, please feel free to call me out of order, Mr. Chair. I don't want to converge two things.
Thank you, Director. Yeah, I'll open up the floor. Mr. Kroll, if you want to comment briefly on that, and then we will move to vote. Mr. Kroll, any comments on that topic?
That is captured on the top of packet page 15, review of prior board resolutions, actions, and key policies. The board office will provide directors, so all directors, with the resource to review previously approved board resolutions, major actions, and key policies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kroll. All right, thank you again for the discussion on this. I want to also just briefly acknowledge, thank you, General Manager CEO Johnson, for partnering in with the team, with Directors Whitmore and Guzman and the board office, and Mr. Kroll for working on this. We know that this does take a tremendous amount of time. I think a lot of the materials that were recorded were excellent last year. I think will be even better this next year. So thank you, or I should say 2 years ago. So thank you for the commitment on that and for the partnership between staff and board developing this. With that, I'm going to go ahead and call for the vote of committee members. Are there any no votes on this action? Seeing none, we have 5 aye votes, 0 no votes, and 0 abstentions. Thank you very much. The motion will pass. We'll now move on to our October board meeting agenda review. Before I ask for a motion, I would just like to note that in consultation with the board office executive manager, Jack Kroll, as well as several directors, including indicating that the Operations Safety and Security Committee meeting, that was noted that there were amendments to the resolution in support of the RTD Vision Zero initiatives. Therefore, I have moved that item to be last on the recommended action list for the draft board agenda, and it is not under unanimous consent and will be discussed at the board meeting in anticipation of amendments coming forward. Additionally, I want to note that our October board meeting will be particularly eventful, as we will be recognizing the winners of the 2024 light rail, snowplow, and bus rodeos. Quite a few people to acknowledge. So just wanted to make sure to highlight that for everyone. All right, with those things being stated about the October board meeting, can I have a motion to approve the board agenda as outlined at this time?
So moved, Secretary Guzman.
And a second.
Second.
Okay. I heard Guzman and Geisinger as the second. Thank you. Any discussion or questions regarding the board agenda? Okay, seeing none, are there any no votes moving forward on the agenda? Seeing none, that has 5 aye votes, 0 no votes, and 0 abstentions. The motion will pass. Look forward to seeing y'all at the October board meeting. It's going to be an eventful one, as we stated. That will move into discussion items. Oh, I do. First, Vice Chair Catlin, your hand is raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry. This is, I know, really picky. But I noticed in our 849-page packet that there is something that may need to be corrected, and that is on packet page 735. It's a list of contacts, and they listed is Dr. Joel Fitzgerald for an emergency contact, and that probably should be adjusted since it's no longer valid. Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you for noting that, First Vice Chair. We'll be moving forward with the October agenda, but I'll ask the board office just to work in with staff to take a look at that and any adjustments that will need to be made and any procedures accordingly for the board meeting. Thank you. All right, we are moving into our discussion items. There are 4, as I noted. There are a few we could table if we are tight on time. However, the first item, make sure we get through the first and the second here. Both are somewhat related. We are joined by Mr. Michael Davies, our Government Relations Officer for both of those. The first being the monthly Government Relations Report for October 2024. Mr. Davies, thank you for joining us. I'll hand the floor over to you to please present.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer. I have a brief government relations report for you all, starting at the federal level. As noted in the written report, funding for federal grant programs through USDOT was extended until December 20th through a continuing resolution that'll likely be addressed by Congress after the general election on November 5th. Also noted in the written report was RTD, City and County of Denver, City of Aurora, and the Federal Transit Administration celebrated on October 4th the grant, the Small Starts grant through the FTA's Capital Investment Grant Program for the East Colfax BRT project. And that was a great event. And in addition to the award, it was also a celebration of the groundbreaking. Moving over to the state side of things, I largely just want to make sure, and this was mentioned in last month's government relations report, but included in the written report are a couple of summaries of bills passed by the TLRC. As you all may recall, the TLRC does take action on a number of bills in the interim to be drafted for next legislative session starting in January 2025. And there are 3 of those bills that do impact RTD or are relevant to RTD. The first one, Increased Transportation Mode Choice, Reduce Emissions, is the title. That was approved by the TLRC and largely directs CDOT to do a statewide assessment on the percentages of what mode people are choosing for travel, whether that be bike, walking, single occupancy car, transit, et cetera, et cetera. And then sets forth some direction for not only just transit agencies, but also for cities to work with CDOT and align with goals that CDOT develops through that statewide assessment of mode choice. 2, there's a railroad investigative report confidentiality bill that is largely changing statute with regard to the Colorado PUC and keeping accident investigations confidential. And so there's a bill that's addressing that and largely making those not confidential, removing the confidentiality language that's currently in statute for the PUC on accident investigations with regards to railroads. And then lastly, there is a paratransit service bill that was approved by the TLRC that directs transit agencies that provide paratransit services to coordinate with local emergency management. That's one requirement. It also has a requirement with regards to ensuring fare collection is comparable to fixed route systems. And then lastly, it does establish a committee to really look at and study paratransit statewide and make some recommendations based on any findings that committee comes up with for the legislature to consider. Overall, no concerns from RTD staff with regards to any of these bills. Just want to make sure that the board and committee is aware of that. Lastly, not included in the written report, but with regards to state matters, this last Monday, October 14th, the Legislative Audit Committee held a hearing. One of the items in that committee meeting was potential legislation for next year's regular session. And one of the items that the Office of the State Auditor is recommending, and in partnership with RTD on this, is changing the definition. And this was one of the recommendations in RTD's 2024 audit. And that is changing the definition of operating expenses with regards to a specific section of RTD's statute that stands now. RTD agrees with this recommendation, and it's largely just aligning that definition with the way that those numbers, operating expenses, are reported to the National Transit Database, the way that APTA takes those numbers and puts them into, you know, the APTA fact book, things like that. And it's just aligning the state definition with how RTD and really all transit agencies report operating expenses. Again, RTD's in support and appreciates the partnership with the Office of the State Auditor on that. The audit committee did vote unanimously to move forward with drafting that. We'll likely see a draft of that legislation at another legislative audit committee in December. And so RTD staff will keep the board up to date on those actions. And then just lastly, on the local front, RTD did hold a region-wide sub-regional service council meeting, and it was an opportunity for RTD to engage our local municipality staff with regards to not only bills that happened last year in the state legislature and how those are being developed and how those are working with RTD and how we're participating in those processes. And really it was an opportunity to cover that and take any questions from municipal staff that participate on the sub-regional service councils. With that, that concludes my report, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davies, for the report and an update. I'll start with questions from committee members and then move to board members. Treasurer Bouquet, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. Davies. What was the timeline on the PUC transparency bill?
Yes, thank you, Director, for the question. So the timeline is that it will be drafted, or it is drafted and approved as a interim bill. It will just be introduced into the regular session come January 2025. So that bill language does exist now, and you can see it on the TLRC website. I'd be happy to follow up and provide you that language, but nothing will happen this year. This will all be for next legislature starting January 2025 to address basically between January and May of next year.
Okay. Yeah, I just I know the agency and the staff probably I didn't hear we're going to take a position on it, rather not, but are going to remain pretty neutral. I think it might be one thing to consider as board directors to look into that one specifically and potentially have us as the discretion as a board to take a stance on it. I think that might be a potentially good idea. So that might be something that we as board members have a discussion. So Chair Davidson or Mr. Kroll, happy to reach out about that. But I think that's one we should look into and potentially take a stance as a board and just say yes or no on it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Treasurer. I will flag that one as we get closer here to session and drafts, something that we can review. I'm sure that will come back to this committee and report as we get closer. So thank you. I flagged that for follow-up. Second Vice Chair Geisinger, please.
Thank you, and thanks, Michael. That's a helpful report. The first bill from the TLRC that you mentioned, that CDOT does this goal setting, and my recollection, and I only looked at it briefly, was that they were looking at CDOT setting goals and then working with transit agencies and local governments on hitting them. And I think it's important that we be involved in that goal setting. Is that part of what they're envisioning, or is that something we need to take a position on? That we're not just involved in how do you hit the CDOT goals for transit, but in what those should be.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Director Geisinger, for the question. And I think you raise a great point. I think it's certainly staff's intent to work with CDOT, as we always do, on anything that the state or any department of the state is doing that may impact RTD. And from my understanding of the way the bill's drafted, I mean, it certainly gives direction to CDOT to establish a process Of course, if there's a public process, RTD will participate in that and make comments to align implementation and make sure that all of this works out. That's one of the things that's outlined in the legislative program, is to really work with departments on rulemaking and things like that. So it's certainly staff's intent to work with CDOT on that. And if we see areas where there is conflict, certainly want to make sure that we comment and participate in how CDOT is putting that together. We'll also do this through CASTA as well, the Colorado State Transit Association, and they'll be heavily involved in this process as well. So I think it's just one more avenue for us to participate and make sure that what CDOT's doing is going to work for not only transit agencies, but as I mentioned, it impacts cities over 25,000 people, as well as the MPOs. Will be involved in the potential goals set by CDOT on this matter.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Geisinger. First Vice Chair Catlin, please.
Thank you. I concur with Director Geisinger. I think we need to be more than just a reactionary body, but that we need to be more proactive in shaping what these criteria are. And I guess I'll just leave it at that. I just think we need to be part of shaping those targets as opposed to reacting to them and commenting on them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, First Vice Chair Catlin. And Second Vice Chair Geisinger, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just that may mean, in addition to being part of the comment, that we want to get involved in what that legislation actually says in terms of when they set a lot of goals, the greenhouse gas goals and a number of other things. I'm not sure if our staff have been involved with that, but I think it's an important place for us to be. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Director Geisinger. Yeah, agreed. And I think Mr. Davies and I had a chance to communicate just yesterday about opportunities for additional communication from RTD's perspective. I think there's probably some things that can factor into, how we communicate with stakeholders around some of the challenges and opportunities that we see. So good. I'll flag that as well for follow-up. I'll go to board directors. Not seeing other committee members' hands raised at this time. Director Ruscia, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Just a few comments. If we could separate bills out, separate the bills like from those that are incoming, because I think those need separate and specific votes when those are introduced, similar to what Treasurer Bouquet referenced regarding the PUC bill, from the bills that we want to run ourselves, and those may need separate votes or could be done as a whole. But if this is something, if we're going to approve a legislative, document, I think that those need to be separated. And the board does have to take a position when things are drafted. And I also just might feel picky, but in the chart that you have, Mr. Davies, which I understand we've used the same chart for a while, I think it would be helpful to separate not just what I just mentioned, but also like add another column. So we have a topic, a description, and I think our position or impact is noted in the description, but I think we could add, like another column that would be staff's feedback, which isn't necessarily board position, but we do want your feedback on if, we should, support, amend, be neutral, monitor, that kind of thing, similar to the reports that you share with us. Does that make sense? Just so that we're like very clear as to what potential legislation or current drafted legislation says and what staff's feedback is on that. And that would, I think, help inform the board when we make our decisions and provide better clarity. And then finally, I would just note, we do have a CDOT liaison from the board, and that's been
a thing for many years, and they should also be utilized in public affairs when we are engaging with CDOT. And I would also think that would include even FRPR because they are housed under CDOT currently, or they get CDOT support. And then finally, I would just add, it would be helpful, and I don't know who this would come from, if we were to receive regular written updates regarding any negotiations with Front Range passenger rail, preferably at meetings with specifics, but at the very least in very descriptive memos, because that also is part of government affairs, and those potential agreements would have a huge impact on RTD, not just right now, but possibly in perpetuity. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Ruscia. And I just took down some of the notes there. I think the CDOT liaison being, as it relates to these CDOT goals and so forth. I think if I believe some of your comments on the table are to the next discussion item, the Legislative and Government Relations Program. Is that correct when you were referring to the table, Director?
Sorry. Yes, sir. I conflated. I was sort of mixing the two things, but thank you for being gracious.
Yeah, thank you. I've got those noted down here. And I see General Manager CEO Johnson, your hand's raised. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Ruscia, for your comments. But just as a point of clarity, I believe Director Ruscia had said FRPR, Front Range Passenger Rail, is housed within CDOT. That is not correct. Front Range Passenger Rail is a separate entity that was created by the state legislature, and they are not housed within CDOT. So I just wanted to ensure that I qualified that for everyone assembled. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. Dr. Ruscia?
Thank you, and thank you, General Manager. When I said housed, I just sort of meant colloquially in that they receive a lot of CDOT support in terms of staffing. So because they wouldn't be able to function fully independently. And so thank you also for that clarification, but I understand what you are saying, and I just wanted to provide that context.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, General Manager. Not seeing other hands raised on this first discussion item of our government relations report. Mr. Davies, thank you very much for providing that and for the update. I'm sure that as we did last year, there will be discussion of these bills as the drafts come together, and the committee and full board will have the opportunity to go through and review all of those bills in more detail. So thank you for your work and for your continued communication to this body as we head into that session. We're going to move to our second discussion item. This is also being presented by Mr. Michael Davies. This is our 2025 draft legislative and government relations program update. We are receiving this as a discussion item, not as its recommended action yet. Mr. Davies, thank you for your work on it. I would encourage directors to review that, ask clarifying questions here, and certainly feel free to make subsequent comments and recommendations to Mr. Davies for consideration, which I'm sure would be appreciated prior to our consideration of this as a recommended action. With that being stated, Mr. Davies, I'm going to open the floor up to you again to please present the Legislative and Government Relations Program.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Again, Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer. So with the 2025 Legislative and Government Relations draft report, wanted to bring this to you all as mentioned as a discussion item this time. This discussion item follows a memorandum sent by General Manager Johnson on August 7th to the entire board, soliciting feedback on this document as staff developed that. So again, welcome the opportunity to provide this as a discussion item this month with the intent to bring this back as an action item in the following month. Just to quickly go through a few changes, not a lot from last year, but with regards to the strategy of how staff will do this, and this largely comes from a comment from Director Guzman last year, which was really to call out and make sure that the board is aware that staff has the full intent to utilize the board, that the board is a tool in the toolbox to how we advocate. we advocate alongside the board. And so wanted to try to put that in as a specific addition in this year, so that you all know that we as staff at RTD want to utilize the board's relationships with elected officials and make sure we're all rowing in the same direction, to ultimately be successful at whatever item we're trying to advocate for. With regards to other changes, under the state section, subsection D, this is related to penalties associated with assaulting transit workers. Wanted to add some language in that section. Really, this item was approved by the board, didn't gain much traction in the legislature last year. Doesn't mean it's still not a priority for RTD, as well as our employees at RTD. So bringing that item back, but also adding some language to potentially just add some more opportunities and avenues to explore this at the state level. And that is the language really associated with trying to leverage some state resources and experts at the state level that are very familiar with criminal justice issues, and see if there are other ideas and external stakeholders that can come up with additional deterrence measures that may be helpful with regards to reducing or avoiding assaults on transit workers. So that is the language that's added in that subsection D under the state section. And then moving on, the only other really big change in terms of language is subsection E under the state section. And that is with regards to really just changing the language from last year with regards to Zero Fare for Youth to make it align with how the program is currently funded and how how long our funding from the state from last year's session will last. And ultimately, we will need another appropriation from the state to be added to the current grant program if RTD is to utilize future grant awards for the Zero Fare for Youth. So just changing that language to align with the current implementation of the program. Outside of that, all of the other goals remain. At the federal level, there is no new surface transportation authorization currently be developed. That has probably another year before that really kicks into high gear, and will be something that will largely be addressed by a new administration. Yeah, and then just to address Director Rusha's comments, staff's intent with the legislative program is to always add bills that the board does take positions on. This is just a general guideline of initial priorities that staff wants to focus on. Other bills that come up, for example, bills that I mentioned that were passed by the TLRC, when those bills get bill numbers and are introduced formally, it's absolutely RTD's intent to work with the board to see, do you want to take a position? Are there changes? Are there amendments? Work that through the normal process. And if the board wants to take positions, we'll absolutely add them to the legislative program. And happy to, Director Rusha, your comment with regards to noting support positions and staff feedback, happy to incorporate that as well. So with that ends my comments, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davies. I'll go to questions first from the committee and then open up to other directors. Secretary Guzman, please.
Thank you. Mr. Davies, this looks awesome, and I appreciate the shout out, but also more so the willingness to work with us as advocates with you on the agency side from the board side. I think that's a valuable partnership that can go far. I do have one set of questions. I don't need the answers right now, but something for everybody to consider. And I know CEO Johnson will definitely have this at her fingertips. But having had conversations with several senators, one in particular asked me about data and reported data on the attacks on frontline workers beyond what goes to the National Transit Database. And I understand that there's some nuance in what we have locally and what gets reported up because of what the requested information is from the FTA on this matter. and the US DOT's expectations. Further to that, what has been charged, what has gone to trial, and what have outcomes look like, if any of that has happened locally within the RTD. And that information could lead to a greater conversation about what this type of legislation looks like from the criminal justice minded senators. And so I'm putting that here, one, so it's on the record that I actually delivered the message, but two, as a heads up, that would be something that we would want to make sure that we speak about with a few senators to get them some information ahead of time, and they will have some pointed questions and feedback for us as well. And that work is being done, so it's not being lollygagged on, but just offering that. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. Mr. Davies or General Manager CEO Johnson, any comments at this time?
If I may.
Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Guzman, for your comments. Of course, we do have information relative to assaults on transit workers because we do track that and they're categorized in a certain way. And then more specifically, Michael Davies and I just had a conversation yesterday relative to data and what might be advantageous for representatives that are interested in working with us and perhaps convening a task force to discuss this item. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as well, that we're aligned in relationship to our thinking what might be done to help create a more welcoming transit and work environment for our frontline colleagues. So thank you.
Thank you, General Manager and CEO Johnson. I'll note for the sake of the record, we were joined by Director Deschel throughout the discussion. Thank you for joining us. I, again, will just conclude with committee members here and move to other directors. I did have just one question. It's related to this topic on item D in the table on supporting legislation to enhance penalties. I, first of all, really appreciate the additional language. I think this is a good, it sounds like there's an appetite at the legislature from what we heard on September 25th at the TLRC, particularly from Representative Basenecker, for example, in asking some more detailed questions of what do we understand, what actually, works here. I know that there's similar conversations happening in other industries. One that was also a topic in last year's legislative session was on the healthcare side of things with frontline workers in healthcare. A question I have, Mr. Davies, and it may just perhaps warrant follow-up or just maybe rhetorical, but if you have any feedback, I'd be curious at this time. Is there an opportunity for cross-industry and sort of interdisciplinary collaboration in terms of how we information share what we understand on our frontline workers versus other industries if the legislature is taking on a broader look at this? Are there those opportunities? Are there any comments you have at this time? Again, if not, that's okay. But Mr. Davies, any thoughts around that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for the question. I think simply put, yes, there are opportunities to collaborate with other industry association groups that have similar goals from a policy direction and can absolutely pursue that. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Yeah, I think that's a good opportunity, even for this board then as well, in working with other policymakers in those industries. Secretary Guzman, please.
Just real quick, also the union's part in this, they spoke right after we did, and the union president addressed this very issue, albeit in a different way. But I think that their voice, if you're going to look at doing some sort of meeting of them, we need to loop them in on all sides as well. Thank you.
Thank you for noting that, Secretary. Yes, and that was great testimony after us. Agreed. All right, move to other directors at this time. Director Ruscia, please.
Thank you, sir. I just I see in that that item or paragraph D, there's additional language we didn't have in previous years about calling in stakeholders, and I appreciate that. One thing that's just tripping me up is that we talk about enhanced penalties, but we're not saying what. Like what is it? Is staff looking for? Are you looking to, felonize something, like just some more specificity before we vote on this, just because it is so very broad and we are talking about, we're talking about like Title 18, we're talking about criminal justice. And so I would just like to know kind of what that means or what the target is. It doesn't mean that's where the bill would fall, because negotiations happen, but I would like to know what would that introduced bill look like? And a key part of that is going to be the what, so if it's rolling back, some legislation that was passed, say that. If it's seeking something new, if it is, the same penalties as, say, for example, enhancements regarding a police officer, whatever it is, just more specificity, I think, would be helpful for the board so we know what we're signing on to. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment, Director Ruscia. Not seeing other hands raised, and along those lines, I would encourage all board directors that have feedback, clarifications, questions, any of those, to please reach out to Mr. Davies, to General Manager CEO Johnson, to communicate those before we bring this forward as a recommended action. So thank you very much, everybody, for the comments and questions on this. Mr. Davies, thank you for preparing this, as always, and walking us through it. And once again, since I've been here, I've seen improvements in the way we take this, in terms of you really brought a process for us of improving the program and proceeding out from that. So thank you for that level of organization and continued refinement. Okay, seeing as that it is 12:31 at this time, we'll conclude that second discussion item. Unless there's any objection, I would like to forego the next two discussion items. I do want to make a brief comment on that, and then I'll just check and make sure there's no objection on this. There was a third discussion item today that is a proposed bylaw amendment to update descriptions of the executive and performance committees. Appreciate Mr. Kroll and General Manager CEO Johnson for working together on these. I would ask, if we do forego this discussion, that directors please review those. Some of it represents just some kind of cleaning up and updating of current practice, but some of it also is clarifying of roles and responsibilities pursuant to things we agreed with from the Office of the State Auditor's audit with respect to Performance Committee and its auspices. So I think there's some good thought that's in there. This would come forward to this committee as a recommended action if we forego this today, but I believe we can solicit feedback from directors should you have any concerns or ideas. Likewise, the fourth item similarly is with respect to the 2025 meeting calendar, another thing that probably warrants directors taking time to really look through it, consider whether this is where we think it should be, and providing that feedback directly to the board office. And as always, welcome to include myself on those communications so I can help pull together all of those. So I think those things can be addressed with some offline review by not just this committee, but all directors prior to them being recommended actions. We will send out emails on those items to remind directors specifically to take a look and provide that feedback. With that all being stated, is there any objection to foregoing the third and fourth discussion item today? Okay, seeing no concern around that, we will go ahead and do that. Mr. Kroll, I can work with you and we can put together just some emails to directors to make sure that we do go ahead and get that feedback prior to recommended actions. Thank you. Director Tisdale, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just very briefly, relative to one of the agenda items that we have for the board meeting, specifically concerning the PTASP, I did want to point out in this environment here for this meeting that I would appreciate if perhaps staff might have someone go through the PTASP. I have gone through it in detail, and there are at least 30 pages with significant typos, incomplete phone numbers, incomplete headings, misspellings, and so forth. And I don't know that we want that going out as our formal product. So I can send to Mr. Kroll the enumeration of pages where I have found those, but I would appreciate it if we would make a note before going final on that somebody take the time to look through and to correct the typos, and especially for things like important phone numbers. For example, in the emergency manual, it says in the event of fire, dial 72 blank, 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 56, or something like that. Gosh, in the event of fire, I'd want to have a full phone number. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Director Tisdale. I'll consider that in other matters, and we'll, thank you for your offer to send those pages and typos that are noted to Mr. Kroll. And I would just ask Mr. Kroll, we can coordinate and then coordinate with General Manager CEO Johnson and her team accordingly as to how we would make any necessary adjustments prior to vote at the full board. Thank you, Director Tisdale. All right, on these lines, are there any other matters to discuss at committee today? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to just note that our next meeting, sorry, Director Ruscia, please go ahead.
I'm so sorry, sir. I'm not part of this committee and you've been very gracious with me. It was a big meeting. I just wanted to note relative to the Vision Zero action item. We do have an amendment and we worked with General Manager, GM CEO, Ms. Johnson on that. I'm not sure if it's sitting in the board office email. I think it is, but I would just ask that we get that disseminated as quickly as possible. And then I do believe in, and I don't know if there's a case law on this or, but just general best practice and something that has always been advised by, like CML and others, is that when you have an amendment coming or some other document or a memo that would inform a vote, that we put it in the published packet for the public. So for transparency, because it is part of a meeting agenda. And so I would just kindly ask that we include that in the packet before it goes out, because we know it's coming. And I thought this would probably be the appropriate forum to bring it up. But again, thank you, Mr. Chair, for your grace, and I'll yield.
Thank you very much, Director. Yes, and thank you for noting that amendment, which will be coming forward at the full board meeting. And thank you to directors and staff involved in aligning around what that would look like. Other matters? Okay, seeing none, I'll note that our next meeting of this committee is going to be Thursday, November 21st. We will have a full agenda that day. We will be looking towards the approval of the 2025 legislative program, the appointment of audit committee members. And again, ask everyone to keep an eye on the emails, both those that have already occurred and those forthcoming on that important topic, as well as the approval of bylaw amendments with respect to executive committee and performance committee. And then we will be having a discussion related to our 2024 meeting accessibility pilot. So with that being stated, we will now move to the final portion of our agenda, which is an executive session. This executive session is pursuant to section 24-6-402 4B CRS to receive legal advice, and section 24-6-402 4E CRS for determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations regarding a potential amendment to the General Manager and Chief Executive Officer's employment agreement. In a moment, the committee will meet in executive session regarding the GM CEO's employment agreement. I would like to append this motion to move into executive session to state that the executive committee meeting will be deemed adjourned after it adjourns into executive session. For public transparency and clarity, this means that once the committee moves into executive session, the main meeting will be adjourned. At this time, I will entertain a motion to move into executive session to discuss the following pursuant to section 24-6-402 4B CRS to receive legal advice, and section 24-6-402 4E CRS for determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations regarding a potential amendment to the GM CEO's employment agreement.
So
motion.
moved.
And a second.
Second, Guzman.
All right. Okay, it's the movement. Second is Guzman. Any opposed? All right, seeing none, that will pass. We will move into executive session. Please allow us several moments to switch over. All directors, please use your other executive session links Please reach out to the board office with any issues. We will join over there. And once we confirm the technology is set up, we will continue. Thank you very much. Have a great day.